Hello, MCU fans! Today we're going to take a look at the question of whether or not Tony Stark was actually supposed to be Doctor Doom. I think you'll find this a fascinating discussion. There will be spoilers for pretty much anything in the Multiverse saga prior to 2025, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have a March contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. All right, so what we're going to do is start by looking at all of the Russo's quotes on why RDJ has to be the one playing Doctor Doom. So if we look at this Hollywood Reporter interview, the Russos say, "I think these movies are going to be a surprise to people. We found a way into the story that's very exciting to us, but we think very radical, and I think it's going to challenge audiences." Also, if you go back to when they first introduced RDJ as Doctor Doom, they said, "Ladies and gentlemen, as proof of the unimaginable possibilities of the Marvel multi-universe," I don't know why they said it that way, "but we give you the one person who could play Victor Von Doom." And they doubled down on that in recent interviews, and they said, "We can't explain that as it's part of the story, but there's nobody else in the world who could play this character the way he's about to." In fact, look at what RDJ himself said. This is important. New mask, same task, right? And then finally, the Russos have been saying what's compelling about these two new Avengers movies is they're a beginning. It's a new beginning. We told an ending story. Now we're going to tell a beginning story. And then who knows where we'll go from there. So this is a summary of those statements, and we'll come back to them as we get deeper in the video. But for now, I want to do a very, very quick speed run of Loki Season 1 and Season 2, because I think we have to look at this at a high level to understand why RDJ has to play Doctor Doom. So remember, a variant Loki was created during Endgame. He escaped with the Tesseract, was captured by the TVA, smacked upside the head. I love that. He goes before Ravonna, who says, well, the Avengers, they were supposed to happen, what they did. But you escaping was not. And of course, we find out that that was wrong because He Who Remains says, every step you took to get here, I paved the road. So Loki was supposed to happen. He was supposed to come before He Who Remains, who then offered him, you either take over and my life's work continues, or you plunge a blade in my chest and an infinite amount of me, start another multiversal war, and I just end up right back here anyway. Reincarnation, baby. I love it. So Sylvie decides she's going to push Loki through the time door, and she's going to go ahead and kill He Who Remains to see if he was bluffing. So what happens from here? Well, Loki discovers that the entire sacred timeline has been encased in the loom the entire time. But when they stopped pruning, it caused the loom to fall apart. And no matter what Loki did, he couldn't stop it from being destroyed. So he used his time slipping to go back to see He Who Remains once again. He Who Remains said, hey, kiddo, did you really think I was just going to sit back and let her kill me? Reincarnation, baby. I love it. So once again, he told Loki, you have no choice. You have to take over my job, continue the pruning, and continue the mission of the TVA. What he did not expect, what honestly nobody would have expected, is Loki had a different idea. Loki went back to the point in time where the loom was being destroyed, and he let it be destroyed. And then he grabbed all the dying timelines, and he ultimately created the tree. So he made the huge sacrifice play, and now he is sitting on his throne, but keeping this tree together. So I've shown this diagram many times throughout my discussions on the multiverse. On the top are all of the other universes, not 616, basically all the other universes that have interfaced with the main MCU. In the middle is the loom, which is, of course, falling apart. That's the red dotted lines. And you see Loki Season 1 and Season 2, of course, the tree and the what if branches. And then on the bottom is basically the main MCU, the 616. So let's look at this at a high level. Basically, you have Loki Season 1 and Season 2, and ultimately Loki creating the tree. But before he created the tree, remember, he went back to that original moment to where He Who Remains offered him a decision. Do you want to take over or not? Loki didn't take over. He created the tree. But what if he had taken over? What if Loki had finally taken up the offer and said, you're right, it's the only option? Well, that's the big question, right? So if we look at the timeline book, it tells us something very important. Loki Season 1 is running parallel to other events in the main MCU. For example, here we see Loki and Sylvie going before the Citadel at the end of time. Now they're talking to He Who Remains, and they make that decision. Well, Sylvie makes the decision to kill He Who Remains, and now they are no longer pruning the branches. And what's the very next thing to happen? Well, Wanda goes to Sword, realizes Vision has been destroyed, and of course she creates the Hex. But what if Loki and Sylvie had made a different decision? What if Loki had agreed to take over from He Who Remains? It could have happened either the first time the offer was made to Loki, or it could have happened when he time slipped back the second time. But in either case, let's say they resumed the pruning so the loom could stay intact, and then Loki took over the TVA. Well, something important to keep in mind is the TVA has the means to block magic from working. Because remember, they told Loki magic powers, they're no good here at the TVA. Well, surely if He Who Remains has the tech to block magic from working at the TVA, then he probably has the same ability to make the loom be able to block magic. So let's turn it to a solid line, because in this scenario, Loki has taken up the offer to resume pruning the branches, and now the loom is intact. Imagine if that had happened during the Multiverse Saga. Well, that would mean the Scarlet Witch wouldn't have been able to search for her kids at the end of WandaVision, right? Because the Darkhold is ultimately magic. And if He Who Remains was able to make it so that magic can work inside the loom, but it cannot escape outside the loom, then she couldn't have searched for her kids. Also, that would mean Doctor Strange's spell wouldn't have backfired. I mean, I don't know what it would have done. It probably would have worked, but it certainly wouldn't have brought in those other Spider-Men and the other villains, because magic can't escape the loom. Now, could the loom have prevented America Chavez from entering or exiting it? I mean, I don't know, but I would argue that if He Who Remains has the tech to stop magic from working, then he probably would have tech to stop America Chavez from ever being able to enter or exit, which means Multiverse of Madness wouldn't have happened. Now, Kang still would have been killed by the ant family in the quantum realm, because we do know that even if the loom is in place, you can enter and exit the quantum realm. Obviously, they did it during Endgame, and the loom was still in place at that point. But the key is the Kang Council wouldn't have known why that Kang was killed. Because I believe that the loom not only stops magic, not only stops America Chavez, but somehow makes the sacred timeline invisible or hidden from the rest of the multiverse. So therefore, there would be no reason for the Kang Council to be mad at the sacred timeline, because they wouldn't know why that Kang had died. Also, I think the Bangles wouldn't have been able to penetrate the loom, because they're either powered by magic or Kang tech, or maybe even both, but both could have been shut down by the protection of the loom. And lastly, the TVA never would have even learned about 10005, because they would still have been pruning and only focusing on the sacred timeline, and therefore Paradox wouldn't have been going rogue and trying to grab Deadpool and all the craziness of that movie. So, wow, the Multiverse Saga would be so different if that loom was in place and intact the whole time. So let's change this diagram to see how the Multiverse Saga would have looked had He Who Remains plan worked. So, first of all, we wouldn't have had any of these other universes, the Spider-Man, 838, etc. None of them would have interfaced with the sacred timeline. Okay, so we remove those lines. Also, if they're pruning, no what if, right? So those are gone, and we can even shrink the loom down a little bit here. Also, Loki's tree wouldn't have been created because Loki went back and assumed leading the TVA, right? So that's gone. In fact, that means the loom just continued on throughout time. I mean, there might have been points in time where it got a little bit weak if they weren't pruning fast enough, but as long as they did their job, the loom would have stayed intact and the sacred timeline would have been safe. Now, as for these other universes, so if you're somebody that believes they only were created because they stopped pruning, then obviously they're all gone, right? They don't even exist. I believe that they exist outside of Loki's tree. I believe they're alternate universes. But so what would have happened in that case then? Well, we have the loom protecting the sacred timeline. I think incursions ultimately would have wiped them all out. Basically, that was the fate that we saw. That's why the Kang in the quantum realm was so worried. They were going to wipe each other out. So basically, had He Who Remains got his way, this would have been the Multiverse Saga. Isn't that wild? There would have been basically no Multiverse Saga. That's the key. But obviously there was a Multiverse Saga. I mean, Loki made a different decision, created the tree, and, the rest is history. So what else happened as a result of Loki creating the tree and them no longer pruning? Well, one of the big things we learned is if you stop pruning, 616 could actually have branches with mutants on it. Crazy, right? I mean, we had this awesome episode with Storm showing us that mutants should have existed in the sacred timeline. Oh, but it was way more than just Storm. This foosball table showed us exactly what the sacred timeline could have looked like had it not been so manufactured by He Who Remains. Because remember, all of these characters were shown on that foosball table. We have characters from the MCU sacred timeline, both heroes and villains. But then we have Infinity Ultron. He was only out there because the pruning stopped. We have mutants now appearing when the pruning stops, both heroes and villains. And we have Fantastic Four heroes and villains once the pruning is stopped. And of course, we have Beta Ray Bill. Darn it, we need Beta Ray Bill soon in a Thor movie. Please, Marvel, please. But the key is that all of these heroes and villains were intentionally kept off the sacred timeline and were only created off of 616 when the pruning stopped. So theoretically, we could have had a sacred timeline that looked like this. All these heroes and all of these villains. In fact, isn't it wild that that's basically what we got with the first version of Secret Wars, right? It was all the heroes versus all the villains. So we could have had this, but instead, He Who Remains manufactured a sacred timeline without many of these characters. So let's take a look at them. Why did He Who Remains not want mutants in the sacred timeline? Well, I'll throw out some theories on it. I mean, certainly Professor X is very dangerous, right? Very powerful, very dangerous, could have been a threat to He Who Remains. But actually, we might have got our answer in Deadpool and Wolverine. It wasn't so much Professor X, it was what comes along with him, which is Cassandra Nova. She was so dangerous that the TVA sent her to the void before she could walk. Wow. So basically, that's a good reason why He Who Remains would be like, yeah, we do not need mutants because we don't need Professor X and we sure don't need Cassandra Nova. Also, we learned that people like us, referring not just to Elektra who's saying this, but also to X-23, a mutant, and Gambit, people like us don't go quietly. The TVA knows that, so they took us out. So not only did He Who Remains not want mutants, but clearly he wouldn't have wanted Elektra, Blade, etc. These were all threats to him, so he made sure the sacred timeline did not have them in it. Okay, very interesting. How about the Fantastic Four? Why did He Who Remains not want them in the sacred timeline? Well, we learned from Johnny Storm, actually, that this is where the TVA sends people that don't play nice with the rest of the multiverse, which certainly implies the Fantastic Four did not play nice, or Johnny Storm wouldn't have been pruned. But even more importantly, we learned in Multiverse of Madness that Reed Richards is the smartest man alive. So you could argue, well, that's a threat to He Who Remains. There's no way he would want Reed Richards to be in his sacred timeline. And while I don't believe it's ever been positively confirmed in the MCU, at least in the comics, Reed Richards' father is Nathaniel Richards, who then goes into the future and sure enough becomes Kang the Conqueror. So yeah, there is no way that He Who Remains would want Nathaniel Richards in the sacred timeline, and if you get rid of Nathaniel Richards, you get rid of Reed Richards by virtue of it, right? I mean, we learned, remember in Loki Season 2, Loki said, maybe it's true, everything he was doing, the pruning, the preservation of the sacred timeline, it was about preventing more of him. So there's no way on earth He Who Remains would have wanted the sacred timeline to have a Nathaniel Richards in it, because basically that is another Kang. Okay, so that's why he didn't want the Fantastic Four in the timeline. That makes sense. But why didn't he want Doctor Doom in the timeline? I mean, obviously Doctor Doom is a combination of both magic and tech. He's incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous. But is there maybe something more to why he did not want Doctor Doom in the timeline? Well, now it's time to go back to these key statements about why RDJ is playing Doctor Doom. So we learn it's going to be a surprise, very radical. It's going to challenge audiences. Also, even though there are unimaginable possibilities in the multiverse, only one person could play Victor Von Doom. It's part of the story, and nobody else in the world could do it. Okay, so it is obviously very, very important that RDJ himself is the one playing Doctor Doom. So if you put all that information together, it sure seems like RDJ is playing a variant of his Tony Stark character, who became Iron Man, and now instead he's Victor Von Doom, who becomes Doctor Doom. So how on earth does this happen? How does one character end up being Iron Man in one situation and Von Doom in another? Well, there's lots of ways you could imagine this working out, right? I mean, one of them is that the Starks end up adopting a young child from Latveria, and that child becomes Tony Stark in one timeline, but in the other timeline, where they don't adopt him, he becomes Doctor Doom. So that could work, right? In fact, there's probably a multitude of ways and scenarios you could come up with. I would argue I'm less interested in how this happened, but I'm more interested in why. Why was it so important to He Who Remains that he not have a Doctor Doom in his sacred timeline, and instead that he have an Iron Man? So the question really comes down to, what role did Iron Man play in bringing the variant Loki before He Who Remains so that he could offer, basically taking over the TVA to that Loki? Because he said, every step you took to get here, I paved the road. So what role did Iron Man play in that? Well, I mean, you could argue he played an important role in the Avengers movie itself, right? But this isn't the variant Loki. That one hasn't been created yet. Did Iron Man play a key role in creating the variant Loki? Why, yes, he did, right? Because it was Iron Man that discovered time travel. It was Iron Man, aka Tony Stark, that made the entire time heist possible. And because Tony Stark had become Iron Man and therefore had that heart device, they used that to make him drop the box containing the Tesseract so that it rolled over to Loki's feet, and ultimately he became the variant Loki, which went to He Who Remains. So yeah, if you look at things from the perspective of how He Who Remains wanted it all to go, right? The variant Loki to take over the TVA and for the Loom to stay in place, then with the option of an Iron Man or a Doctor Doom, oh, it's an easy choice, right? You want Iron Man. Iron Man was critical to creating the Loki who came before him. So yeah, that is why He Who Remains wanted an Iron Man and did not want a Doctor Doom. So that leads to the next question, which is, where will RDJ's Doctor Doom come from? Now, my opinion is he won't come from a branch in Loki's tree, because I think what's going to draw Doctor Doom to Loki's tree is that he's in an alternate universe experiencing incursions, and he's going to realize the only solution is Loki's tree. So we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I don't think he's going to come from the tree. So, okay, what other universe could he come from? Well, we have the Spider-Man universes, but there's really no compelling reason for him to come from those. He could come from the 2000s Fantastic Four universe, but that already has a Doctor Doom. And he could come from the Daredevil Elektra universe or the Blade universe, but again, there's just no compelling reason for that. So I think there are 4 likely universes he could come from. So first of all, I actually think there's only 3, because I think the universe where Monica Rambeau ended up with the Beast, I think that's the same universe as 10005. We'll have to wait and see, but that's my guess. Plus, I just don't think there's any reason for him to come from an X-Men universe. No, there's really only 2 universes. So we have 838, and I could see some good reasons he would come from there. I mean, basically 616 caused so many problems in that universe. They killed Reed Richards. If Doctor Doom had been part of the Illuminati, or at least was aware of the Illuminati, then he would be very nervous about 616 and the problems that were caused. But honestly, I think the best universe for him to come from is the new universe we're going to see during the Fantastic Four movie. So that's my guess, but let me know your thoughts. Which of these universes is he going to come from? Or maybe you think he's going to come from a branch in Loki's tree. But I'd love to know your thoughts on that. So the next question is, what is Doctor Doom's plan? Well, that's pretty well summarized by new mask, same task. Because remember, Tony Stark wanted to build a suit of armor around the world, basically to protect the world from any harm. So what's the next plan bigger than that? Well, Doctor Doom will want a plan that saves the entire universe. That's going to lead to the God Emperor Doom that we saw during the 2015 Secret Wars run. I think ultimately he's going to overthrow Loki from his throne, use that position to then create Battleworld, and I'm betting that's going to be on the Void simply because we saw that awesome Easter egg in Deadpool and Wolverine of this Secret Wars comic, which is the very comic where Doctor Doom creates Battleworld. So ultimately, he's going to create Battleworld, which is his way of creating a suit of armor around the universe, if you will. So then finally, how is it going to all end? Well, the Russos told us. We told an ending story, a la Endgame. Now we're going to tell a beginning story, a la Secret Wars and beyond. So they're going to end up creating what He Who Remains artificially prevented, which is a universe with mutants, Fantastic Four, everybody in it. And it is going to be glorious. I cannot wait to see what things look like after Secret Wars and the reboot. So let me know what you think about these theories. Do you think that He Who Remains intentionally created a sacred timeline without mutants and Fantastic Four? And do you think my theories are right about why he didn't want a Doctor Doom, but why he did want an Iron Man? I would love to know your thoughts. I read and respond to everything, so fire away. So don't forget about that contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. And there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. And I love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the metaphysics chat trying to figure out this crazy multiverse. So we have 2,000 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and we would love for you to be part of it. So I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll continue to enjoy the ever-growing the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.